following on from expansive framing that promotes threshold crossing, following on from having an actionable theory of engagement. The third main characteristic that I think you really have to think about whether or not you're building online at a distance, synchronous, asynchronous, or if you are synchronous in person, is building out your social spaces, which may be electronic spaces, may be a physical space, but that allows for an in-betweenness. Um, Geographers and sociologists of geography talk about public spaces and they talk about private spaces. They also have third spaces that are neither. In a classroom, physically, that what that ends up being, those sort of in-between spaces, could be a teacher's office, the hallway. I happen to have a patio area outside my classroom that aren't quite public in the same way as class conversation is, where attention, at least in theory, see last video, is on the speaker, nor is it private entirely, where there's only one or two people out there, but it's off to the side. It's liminal. It's that corner where you pull a student to have a quick word with them, or when you get down and take a knee next to their desk and talk to them very quietly during group work. Having those physically, because you're used to, at least my faculty is, used to engaging with space around you, is much more consistent to consider and therefore easier to pull off than designing for that liminal space online. Semi-public spaces, you do that with breakout rooms, you do that with shared Google Docs. Public spaces, private spaces, you do that with private comment, you do that with emails. But having those, designing for those spaces that aren't quite either, that's essential. And it's hard when you're online. Some teachers, I've seen professors have done it where they have the public space is, Jesse Stommel is particularly the one I'm looking at. Thinking of, he has the public space of a Medium board for his course, and then a semi-private space with Slack channels. The Global Online Academy, which was very, very helpful and fundamental in my early thinking about how do you take an entire instructional program online with less than 72 hours notice. They say design for agency, design for wayfinding, design for relationships. And that relationship piece really can be built in those liminal spaces that aren't entirely private, that aren't entirely public. The Zoom lets you do this by sending chat messages in the public chat UI window, but to only specific participants, to have that back channel. And so one of the things that we did as a school was build in office hours that were open in the same Zoom website, web space as the class, but it was open to any student at any time. So you could have students from your third period and your sixth period coming together across to work, or students who were remote online would come into that while you would also be in your classroom with tutorial hours, a physical student online. And so those were those liminal spaces. Um, blast emails where you're sending messages to specific groups as well. And again, using breakout rooms, those sorts of things. Um, using shared documents where an entire group can be editors and contribute. Um, those those were helpful. And so after you look at your curriculum and its relationship to the world and the students and design intentionally to try and have an expansive framing, after you consider going in, what are your notions of, what are you looking for your students to commit to? What are you looking for them to attend to? Um, and in my case, specifically with our younger students, giving them a very brief repertoire of here's how you show that commitment, here's how you show that engagement, that attention in positive ways when you're online. After you've considered those two aspects, looking and considering this third one is the of how are you going to build into your cadence and into the social dynamics these spaces where small groups can work, where you can have these ad hoc impromptu one-on-ones or taking a pair together, to have these discussions. All of this in service again of attending, right? It's easier to attend when you're in a smaller group than you are when you are in a larger group. But at the same time, especially with my students, pulling them publicly into a one-on-one tends to escalate the behavior or the rebellion or the retreatism rather than increasing commitment. So having these liminal spaces, these semi-public, semi-private spaces when you're online, when you're blended, when you're physically there, and considering how those work in the design and in the social dynamics, the instructional cadence of your coursework really are important.